You're listening to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro, the place to learn about new technology and technological advances before they become mainstream. This podcast is sponsored by Ingram Micro's Imagine Next. It's not about the destination. It's about going someplace you never thought possible. Go to imaginenext.ingrammicro.com to find out more. Let's get into it.
Welcome to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro. I'm your host, Carrie Roberts, and my guest today is Chris Rosen, a Program Director of Offering Management at IBM. Welcome, Chris. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Carrie. Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
For those that are listening, if you've been following us the past few weeks, we are continuing our chat about IBM Cloud. And if you haven't yet, you could check out the other conversations on this topic. There will be links to them in the show notes as well. Now, Chris, you today are talking about developing cloud native on Red Hat OpenShift on IBM Cloud. And OpenShift is Kubernetes at the core, and it focuses on making things easier for developers and the operations team. How does it do this? And can you give us maybe more detail into what Red Hat OpenShift is and what type of customers or businesses are using it?
Sure. So you're absolutely right. So Red Hat has really tried to simplify and secure and harden Kubernetes as an open source upstream distribution. So what we've then done from IBM Cloud perspective is really take Red Hat OpenShift and run that as a managed service on IBM Cloud. Because as you said, we're really focused on simplifying the environment for our main users and personas, which are developers. So by using a managed service, think about raising the bar of responsibilities for our customers. So that way they, again, really focus on delivering their line of business objectives, not deploying and managing OpenShift. And with our OpenShift offering, we're not only focused on kind of day one, so that first initial getting started, how do I deploy my OpenShift clusters? How do I deploy the networks and the storage and the compute? And we do all of that, whether it's point and click to the UI or you automate it from the CLI or API or Terraforms. But then we're also really focused on day 2 plus. So now that you have those clusters up and running, how do I ensure integrations with the platform? How do I ensure upgrades? How do I do that in a seamless manner, which again doesn't take down my apps and impact my end users? So for our managed offering, again, we're very focused on securing and hardening that environment, providing operational excellence, whether that's a 99.99% financially backed SLA, providing a native OpenShift environment, because if you're using OpenShift on-prem and now you start deploying on Red Hat OpenShift on IBM Cloud, you want access to the same OpenShift console and dashboards and views and tools. So that way it really simplifies that transition to cloud. And then the last thing that you had asked was around customers. And what we did, we sat down with the various CIOs of different industries in IBM, whether that's retail, travel, fintech, healthcare, and we listened to what are the problems that their customers are having and how could we then address those problems. So we sat down knowing that software development impacts all of those different industry verticals, and how do we solve that? So whether you are in retail or we have a lot of travel or traditional IBM customers in the financial institutes, that's really where we're targeted in solving. And it's not a one-size-fits-all for size or customer profile.
You know, and of course, businesses are trying to understand the best options for when it comes to the cloud. Can you share with us some of the complexities of a multi-cloud world and how a business can choose the right option to align with their own business objectives?
Yeah, and that's definitely one of the use cases that comes up time and time again. And we know and acknowledge when we're talking to our customers that they're running in this multi-cloud, hybrid cloud world. And that comes with those inherent challenges around different, observability, different monitoring, our logging tools, our governance, or access controls. So we're really focused on solving those complexities and giving you consistency regardless of where or how that workload is running. Because ultimately, it comes down to portability. And, that's really why developers initially gravitated toward container technology is because it allowed you to package up your app and all of its dependencies and move it between environments. Because, we've all been in a situation where it works on my laptop, but it doesn't work in yours. Clearly, it's your problem, Carrie. Good luck. So containers provides that portability, and inherently, by being able to move that workload, now we have challenges around those insights and observability and access controls. And that's really what we're trying to focus and solve for our users.
I want to bring up a really interesting case study that IBM has worked with. We've talked a lot about how you've helped various businesses, including things like American Airlines. But about a year ago, IBM changed the game for professional tennis players with something called Coach Advisor, where IBM and the United States Tennis Association were able to evolve the US Open experience for the fans, the tennis players, and the coaches with AI and hybrid cloud technology. And I love how IBM brings a lot of creativity along with their tech. Can you share with us what was created and how it helped the U.S. Tennis Association?
Yeah, so sports, I love sports. So this is a very interesting use for me when we were kind of missing live sports with what's been happening in the world, clearly a void in a lot of people. So what's interesting about this use case is that our event teams, and whether that's running the US Open in tennis, or if you're a golf fan and you like the Masters, or near and dear to my heart, ESPN Fantasy Football, all runs on top of our managed OpenShift offering. And it really gives, by using that managed service, moving up that line of responsibility, it lets each of these teams focus on delivering their particular objective, not running OpenShift, deploying OpenShift, auto-scaling, auto-recovering if something breaks or goes down. So with, as we go through a particular tournament and we get closer to the finals and the biggest stars are there, the number of API loads and video loads and page views just really increases dramatically. So those teams leverage our managed service to be able to scale out and accommodate that workload and serve those things up. And it just really complements what you're viewing on TV to what you could look at on your phone or your laptop and see additional insights and metrics and videos to really round out that experience.
No, I think it's great. And like you said, being able to kind of create this robust experience for sports, whether you're there or not, is a great thing that you all are doing. OpenShift makes it's an interesting option for businesses, of course, but I'm curious, what makes OpenShift unique, and what would you say are maybe like 3 key features that are made especially for developers?
Well, with OpenShift, it is really meant to provide consistency, to provide that common layer that can run in your data center, in IBM Cloud, or in any other cloud. And that's really Red Hat and IBM's broader hybrid cloud strategy, is to provide that consistency. From a developer perspective, there are definitely several areas where IBM and Red Hat are focused. The first, I would say, is probably the OpenShift service mesh. And this is when you're building those cloud native applications and you're using containers and microservices. As you start to really expand the quantity of microservices in your application, you need insights to how the various components are performing. Maybe you need to set mutual TLS between different microservices in that application. And you do that through an open source project called Istio. This was launched jointly between IBM, Google, and Lyft back in April of 2017. Fast forward to the community just continuing to evolve and grow, and now it's a core tenet within Red Hat OpenShift. So we're really excited about that, bringing that Istio insight into OpenShift. And then because it is the OpenShift service mesh, it includes other projects like Kiali for visualization. So that way you can actually see that microservice is calling microservice B, but it times out before B gets a response from C. Without this type of open source project, you wouldn't have any insight to how those microservices are actually performing. The second thing is around serverless. Think back, a year or so ago, if you were a developer and you were running things in containers or serverless, which is event-driven type capabilities, you generally had to do that using separate technology stacks. Now with OpenShift, they're bringing serverless through another open source project called Knative, into the OpenShift platform. So now a different component of my architecture may be event-driven or serverless, which means it doesn't run all the time. It just sits there waiting, listening for some event, some trigger to take place. And when it does, then I take some action. The third thing is around code-ready workspaces, thinking about developer productivity and a workspace that essentially allows those teams to develop on top of OpenShift without really having to know all of the inner workings and details of Kubernetes itself. So again, just really simplifying the development experience for customers. And I know you asked for three. I'm going to throw you a bonus fourth one. The other thing that I think is really important and powerful are operators. Think about operators as a way to build in operational knowledge into software. So now I can come into the OpenShift console and I can look at things, whether it's IBM provided, Red Hat provided, or through our trusted partner ecosystem, and not only easily deploy that software, but then also optionally opt in to updates and lifecycle management. So I'm just focused on using whatever software and letting the operator provide that ongoing lifecycle management.
I mean, IBM is always thinking about developers. On this show, we are also talking about security quite often. So I'm curious, what are some ways to keep your open source secure?
Also a great question. And, we've talked about open source. It's great. It gives us that portability. It allows us to eliminate vendor lock-in, all things that are very important tenets to our customers and users. But the reality is, open source projects, especially something as complex as a Kubernetes service stack, are very, very complex to deploy and manage. And that's why we're really looking toward a managed service, so that way you focus just on delivering and writing software that's applicable to you. So all that being said, both IBM and Red Hat live in these upstream communities because it's not just Kubernetes. There's network overlays, there's storage plugins, there's the container engine itself. So we need to have active participation to ensure that these open source projects are, one, secure and hardened, but also have the operational characteristics that are important. They upgrade. One change in a community doesn't adversely impact something else. So the first piece of this question is really about being active members in the upstream community, because we can't just get something inside IBM or Red Hat and then identify a security weakness. We really need to work closer with the community to ensure that they are aligning with the right security practices. Then, once we do bring these open source projects into IBM and Red Hat, we do some things to make sure that they are, in fact, continue to be secure and hardened. In our managed service in IBM Cloud, we also build on top of this open source security. So things like compute isolation. If I need bare metal as a part of my managed service, I can do that. I get the isolation. Another area is around using, for example, Lux encryption on all of the secondary drives where all of your container workloads run. So that way, each worker node in that cluster has a unique encryption key, just adding another layer of protection to that workload. And then the third area is around key management. Think about different layers depending on the type of workload that you're running. So the first one is bring your own key. In IBM Cloud, that's using IBM Key Protect, where basically you own and control the lifecycle of your key management. The higher level is what we call keep your own key. And we use that by using HyperProtect services. And IBM Cloud is the only public cloud provider that provides level 4, FIPS level 4, 140-2 encryption that ensures that even though it's a managed service, IBM SREs, or site reliability engineers, do not have access to your data or your apps.
We're talking so much about this, and I think a question a lot of people have is about pricing. And IBM pricing is competitive in this space with many options for clients, I think, despite what some customers may initially believe. To clarify, what are the various pricing options available today?
That's also a good point. So when we're at various conferences and other events, and we're having discussions with people that may not be engaged with IBM, they may assume that IBM would be priced higher, just given IBM and our heritage with the types of workloads and customers that we're working with. And that's true. Obviously, IBM has, typical customers are these large enterprises and banks and other highly regulated industries. But we also have a number of, whether you're in the small and medium business size or even startups that are leveraging our broader developer services offering. And that's really resonating because of the ease of use, the lifecycle management that we're providing as our managed service, and still providing all of the security that's inherent and required for those large enterprises. So it really gives you a lot of flexibility. When you come in from a pricing perspective, you're going to pay for whether you want different compute isolation. So maybe I just want a shared compute model where it's a single tenant virtual machine, multi-tenant hypervisor and hardware. So that's really just any public cloud VM. But if I want additional isolation in that workload, then I get that as an option. I could do on-demand hourly type pricing. I can scale up or down manually or automatically to kind of address not only my utilization requirements, but then also potentially some pricing requirements that I may have. And then the last thing is around reservations, being able to purchase reserved instances for Red Hat OpenShift on IBM Cloud, whether that's a 1 year or ultimately a 3-year reservation, and get a much lower hourly price point based on that.
And for those that are listening, you can actually try OpenShift on IBM Cloud for free for 4 hours. Chris, where can they do that?
So the easiest way is just go out to your favorite internet search and you can bring up Red Hat OpenShift on IBM Cloud demos. And we've got a great landing page. You could watch a video and learn through what exactly is the offering, what's the value proposition around it. But if you're like me and you'd rather play with it and really kind of kick the tires on an offering, you can spin up this free environment where you have access. And it's a great educational, tutorial, hands-on experience where on the left side of my window, I've got the different commands and kind of explanation of what I'm doing and why. And then on the right-hand side of the window is the actual terminal. So you can copy and paste and run those commands directly in that environment. You can try Red Hat OpenShift on IBM Cloud for free. If you get started and then you get pulled off by some urgent email from your boss, no problem. You can extend that lease on the environment and come back and finish up that tutorial at a later time.
Now, Chris, the one question we ask all of our guests on this show is, where do you see technology going within the next year?
So great question. I mean, obviously, we live in a very dynamic space. Things are changing every day. I think there's a few areas where we are seeing the technology trend, and whether that's from conversations with customers, where we'd like to see the technology go, or through different analyst briefings when we talk to the Gartners and Forresters of the world and understand where trends are going. So 2 high-level things that I'd like to share. The first is a movement toward more autonomous computing. And in my particular realm, when we think about managed OpenShift, it's really about providing all of that lifecycle management for the customer. So maybe they give some upper limit thresholds around capacity and isolation choices that they want. But after that, they want to be completely hands-off with the OpenShift cluster. Let IBM handle scaling and any patching and remediation, whether it's at the operating system level, vulnerability remediation, or anything in that complex Kubernetes and OpenShift stack. The second area that we've really seen a lot of traction is around distributed cloud. This is a relatively new term that's come out from Gartner back in first quarter of 2020. And it's basically bringing an IBM or a cloud services to run in your infrastructure, whether that's in your data center or on another public cloud infrastructure. And the nuance here is that those services are still managed by the cloud provider. So earlier this year, we announced something called IBM Cloud Satellite at our Think conference. And IBM Cloud remains the source of truth. You would always start there, but then you can create a satellite location, whether that's your data center or other public cloud, And now I can manage services remotely, all from one central place. Earlier, you had asked me about kind of complexities of a multi-cloud world. This is taking that to the next level. Now I can deploy managed services, whether it is an OpenShift cluster or a managed database or Watson services. I can have that run in my data center, but still be managed by IBM.
Now, we talked about a whole bunch of things here, how it works, what the pricing is, who it's for, some case studies. If people want to learn more or they want to connect with you, where is the best place to do that?
Absolutely. So if you're already working with Ingram Micro, you can reach out to Donald Oman. His email will be down below. If you prefer Twitter, you can reach me there as well. It's at Chris Rosen 188. We can also do email, which is crozen@us.ibm.com. We always encourage your questions, your feedback, your comments. Challenge us on some of the things that you've heard today, and we'd love to continue that discussion.
Thank you so much, Chris, for sharing, again, your knowledge and your passion for everything that you do. And we appreciate you being here today.
Thank you very much, Carrie. Appreciate it.
If you like this episode or have a question, join the discussion on Twitter at Ingram TechSoul with the hashtag B2B Tech Talk. Thank you for tuning in and subscribing to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro.
You've been listening to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro, hosted by Carrie Roberts. This episode was sponsored by Ingram Micro's Imagine Next. B2B Tech Talk is a joint production with Sweetfish Media and Ingram Micro. Ingram Micro production handled by Laura Burton and Christine Fan. To not miss an episode, subscribe today on your favorite podcast platform.